Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's been a couple of months, been super busy doing work stuff. So happy to get back into it and share some anatomy with you all. Today we're looking at the hamstring group, particularly a bicep femoris, semimembranosus, and semitendinosus. As always, we're using Complete Anatomy app. So I'm just showing you the surface of what this app can do. So if you like what you see, definitely go check out Complete Anatomy. So we have in the hamstring group, which is the muscle group on the back of the leg or the posterior aspect of the leg. And we have three muscles comprising the hamstring. We've got bicep femoris, which is on the lateral side of the leg or the outside. And we've got semitendinosus, and underneath semitendinosus, we have semimembranosus. And these three muscles come together comprise the hamstring group, and their primary action is to extend the hip and flex the knee. So let's have a look at more detail. So bicep femoris, if we look up into the attachment point, attaches onto your sit bones or the ischial tuberosities. So the bony protuberance here of the ischial tuberosity. So if you're sitting tall with your bum wheel on the seat, you kind of feel these sit bones, and essentially your three hamstring tendons all go to the same spot, essentially. So you can kind of palpate it there as well. Then the bicep femoris goes down to the head of the fibula. So this part here. So the tendon attaches onto the fibula, and then you've got you'll have hypofascial connections coming off into the tibia on the anterior, lateral, and going to the posterior side as well. So you'll get this kind of head of fibular attachment across the knee joint itself. Doesn't actually attach to the femur on the lateral aspect, although it does cross over it on the lateral aspect there. Then we can see here we have the short-headed bicep femoris, which then does go to the femoral head, the lateral condyle of the femur. So you do have the short head connecting to the lateral condyle of the femur, and then the long head attaching to the head of the fibula. So two attachments there. Interesting enough as well that the short head of the hamstring attaches onto the line of the femoral shaft, the posterior line of the shaft. So you've got this kind of connection of the femur and the hamstrings together, a bit like the quads of the front, where the quads attach right down the line of the shaft of the femur. Same with the hamstring in a sense. On the other side, we've got bicep. Of the bicep group here, or the hamstring group, and we've got the semitendinosus, which is tendon, meaning it's got the long tendon, and it kind of goes from the back, wraps around the femoral condyle, the medial condyle, and then goes onto this part of the tibia, this flat bony area here. So you'll have a lot of fascial connections here, and this is called the pes anserine. So you'll also get the gracilis and the sartorius muscle attaching in this spot here. So you can get bursitis develop there when this tendon gets over tension and it's kind of pulling and irritating this spot here. So sometimes you can get a bursa manifest there. Then underneath you've got semimembranosus, mainly because it's got this bigger, thicker tendon, more membranous. And this one attaches onto the posterior aspect of the femoral condyle here. Now, when all three of these muscles contract together synchronistically, it's going to create hip flexion and hip extension. So let's have a look at those three muscles in motion. My computer a few seconds to fire up. Here we go. Okay, so when the knee stays in position, so it's not bending, not flexing or extending, it's just fixed, the movement's going to come from the hip joint. So this is hip extension. So the knee is coming behind the line of the hip joint here. So whenever the femur gets pulled behind the midline of the femoral socket there, That's called hip extension. And so as these muscles are contracting, they're pulling upwards. So remember, muscles slide together. If you've got good lumbopelvic stability, okay, this will create a firm anchor there, and then the leg will be pulled behind you. So this happens in any walking movement. So you can imagine, so when you heel strike here and you pull the leg through, it's the glute and the hamstring work together to create hip extension. So these muscles are synergistic, or they co-contract together. So whenever you're doing hip extension, it's very difficult to isolate hamstring and glute max. They basically work together at the same time. Now, when you isolate at the knee, what we get is knee flexion. This is a better picture, actually. So we have the knee bending in flexion. And it's stopping here at 90 degrees. So it stops there at 90 degrees. So that's a 90-degree angle here. Ideally, you should be able to get your calcaneus, your heel bone, to connect to your sit bones here. So you sit your heels, you sit on your heels. So your ischial tuberosities can come down here, and that will give you full knee flexion or full knee bend. So that's one goal in terms of knee range of movement. We want to try to restore from injury full knee bend, or basically you bend the knee back so that the calf group and the hamstring group connect together, and you physically can't go any further. So depending on how big the muscular kind of hypertrophy is through here, that's what will happen with the hamstring group there. Now, what happens when you get knee flexion and hip extension? So then you'll get knee bend, and then the hip glute max will drive. So when we're doing muscle testing, one way we try to like isolate the glute max is you flex the knee a little bit, and that kind of like takes the puts the hamstrings in a short position. So they can still create hip flexion, but they're in a short position, so they don't have a lot of strength, a lot of power. So the majority of it then comes through the glute max. So we can kind of see if the glute max is dominant, or if the hamstrings are weak, or vice versa. Now, one thing that we wanted is have this nice balance between the different muscles. So, for example, if you've got the bicep femoris series overdeveloped and the two medial hamstrings are underdeveloped, what you'll get is an uneven pull on the tibia here. So the bicep femoris is going to pull on the tibia, and that's going to create a rotation or a torque. And so you're going to get a little bit of knee twisting, if you will, knee twisting like that. That's not ideal. And same thing on the other way. If your inner hamstrings are overdeveloped versus the lateral ones, then you're going to get an uneven flexion or knee bend, which is not ideal. So the kind of trick is when you're training hamstrings is to train evenly, and that's just about keeping your foot in a nice position so that when you're doing, for example, your leg curls, you're kind of getting an even contraction on that. Now, this can be affected by things like flat feet or pes cavus, where your foot rolls in. So when your foot rolls in, take your leg out straight again here. So if you typically have a flat foot or pes cavus, where the arch of your foot, for whatever reason, is not keeping this arch here, you can go flat. And so what that does, that brings the knee into what's called valgus. So you get an orientation coming in medially. All right. And then that changes a different tension in the hamstring. So you can see that here, this arch will drop down this way, the knee will come in this way. So that's going to tension the calf and the hamstrings in a different way. And typically what happens, depending on the person, the inner thigh muscles go crazy tight, and the medial calf goes crazy tight as well. And then these muscles here in a lengthened position, and then they're overworking, and you get this muscular imbalance happening, which can be a bit of an issue. Now, there's a lot of redundancy in the postural system, if you will, and so there's no perfect joint alignment. But what happens is that if it gets too excessive, where the forces can't be balanced, then tissues get overworked, and so they can create injury, That could be muscle tears, muscle sprains, ligament sprains, bursitis, tendonitis, potentially even cartilage issues, because then you've got uneven loading of the joint. So you know, your knees kind of got this unevenness between the joint when you're loading. Okay, and you get like that. So you'll get one wear down the other. So if you got a flat foot, for example, often the inner knee joint gets opened and then the outside one gets compressed, so the outside knee gets worn down more just because of the angle of the joint. So something to be aware of. So we want to definitely try to train hamstrings together. Now, in terms of the nerve, so let's have a look at the neural supply. If we can find the neural supply. Actions, arterial, where are we? Actions testing. Where is it? Arterial supply. Arteries, innervation, tibial division of the sciatic nerve L5S2. Okay, so L5 is the bottom lumbar vertebrae or disc segment, and then S1, S2 here. So you're going to get this sciatic branch come down through here. So if you get like a L5 disc bulge protrusion, you can get sciatica, and that can potentially inhibit or weaken or disrupt the nerve supply to these muscles, and that can make them less functional, which is not cool. So when you get people with lower back injuries, often the hamstring groups get interfered with, as in they get inhibited, so the nerve supply is not coming down, so the signals to contract and relax are interrupted. So the muscles can either spasm or tense or get tension because they're getting in a signal to keep contracting when they should be relaxing, or they're not getting any signal at all because the neural nerve supply is being interrupted from somewhere higher up. Once the disc issue is resolved, which is often the case, if we don't rehab the hamstring properly, we get a lack of hip extension and a lack of knee extension. And so forward ambulation is a problem because of the hamstrings that literally pull you forward. Okay, so as you heel strike, the hamstrings are going to be contracting and pull your hips over your feet into hip extension. So really, really important with walking. Anything to do with walking, running, jogging, super important muscle group. Best ways to develop hamstring function is you want to learn how to hinge the hips. So things like stiff-legged deadlifts are fantastic, where you are getting a tension stretch under control. So when you do a hinge forward, you're eccentrically attracting the muscle. So that's a great way of developing strength. It's a great way to stimulate tendons. It's a great way to develop body awareness. At the same time, you also want to then develop knee flexion. Okay, knee flexion is kind of difficult to do outside a gym if you don't have like a leg curl type thing. But a good one is a hip bridge, where as you're coming up in hip bridge, you are digging your heels in and pulling back, and that'll help activate the muscles in knee flexion. So there's definitely a couple of ways we can do that. Okay. But the key thing is really about that eccentric lengthening control, because what's happening is one of the key things that the hamstring does. Look around. It's kind of like an anti-gravity muscle. So you can imagine if you tilt your torso forward that way, the hamstrings are going to take the load, all right, and they're kind of trying to control the hip pelvis. And remember that the spinal column sits within the sacrum, which sits within the pelvic girdle. So anything that affects the pelvic girdle position, it will affect the spine and vice versa. So as you tip forward, the hamstrings are contracting with the calves and the glutes and the lumbar extensors to kind of like stabilize and keep everything in good alignment and upright. If they're weak or not functional, or the motor control is poor, meaning like the technique or the coordination, you're you don't get that controlled lowering forward. And then so other aspects of the back need to take over. So that might be the lumbar extensors. You can even find calves getting really, really strongly developed here. You might get excessive hip flexors engaging because they can stabilize from the front. So you can get these workarounds, but the problem is if, for example, the hip flexors from the front, the psoas and iliacus are stabilizing, that's going to pull more anteriorly on the lumbar spine, create more lordosis, which then puts the glute max and the hamstrings in a lengthened position and a weaker position. Okay, so they're kind of a bit more in stretch. They don't have enough muscle fibers cross-bridging to really generate force, so they get weaker. So you'll often see this with folks who are trying to stretch their hamstrings. They feel like they're really tight, and it feels tight because the muscles in a position where they can't actually cross bridge and contract and generate force. So they're really just isometrically holding in position and not letting go, not relaxing. So that creates a lot of tension in the muscle, fatigue, and fatigue. Tension is the connective tissue. Connective tissue is sensory, particularly about 8% of fascia is sensory. So you're creating this constant tension in the tissue. And then we start to kind of manifest chronic pain type situations, either in the muscle, on the tendon, on the joint, mechanically, or the above. So it can get quite messy. So if you can learn how to hinge correctly, as in like a deadlift type pattern, that's one really essential way to develop hamstring function. And so a forward fold, forward bending, and coordinating pelvic position with hamstring use is really, 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 really helpful. So whenever I'm doing back rehab with somebody, one of the things that we will always work on is how to create hip extension and knee flexion in standing, sitting particularly, and how they can use these hamstrings eccentrically, so they're lengthening under the load to prevent the weight of gravity tipping their torso forward, which is part of their job. So they're like an anti-gravity muscle. They're stopping you from falling forward. They're also an ambulation muscle. They're propelling you forward at the same time. So they have a lot of things to do. They're a multi-joint muscle, as in like crosses the hip joint and crosses the knee joint. So two muscles, so it requires a lot more control and coordination or motor control. And they're quite powerful muscles as well because they can generate a lot of force. So they are one of the more important muscles on the body in terms of just function and posture, probably one of the most undertrained, and it's kind of hard to wrap your head around how they work. But if you just think about the attachment on the pelvis here, remember the pelvis is going to pivot through the ball and socket. So whenever you swinging your leg, you're swinging through this pivot point here. So the hamstrings are always about bringing the legs behind you or pulling back into hip extension. Or if the legs are fixed in position, so make it stay on the ground. If you tip forward, the hamstrings are controlling the tip forward. So if you're tipping forward in like a forward fold or a bow type situation or a hinge or a deadlift, hamstrings are very much involved in that movement. Okay, so that's a nice little overview of the hamstrings. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment down below. I'd love to kind of answer any kind of functional anatomy questions. And please leave a like and share, spread the channel, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers. Bye.